There are lessons in life that we learn from books. There are lessons we learn from mentors. And then there are the lessons that are paid for, not with tuition, but with pieces of your soul. They are burned into you by betrayal, by loss, by a devastation so complete it reshapes the very person you are. Today's story is about a lesson that came with a price tag so high, it's difficult to even comprehend. My guest is Doug Macklem, and the lesson he learned cost him 6 years of his life, his inheritance, his retirement, and his faith in the people around him. All told, it cost over $800,000. But as you're about to hear, the financial cost was perhaps the smallest part of the price he paid. Doug, thank you for being here and for your courage in sharing this.
Thank you for having me. It's a story I never thought I would tell publicly, but I've come to realize that silence is what allows these situations to happen to others. If my story can prevent what happened to me from happening to even one other person, then maybe the price I paid won't have been entirely for nothing. This is what happens when profound loneliness is met with calculated, cruel deception. This is the story of how I fell deeply in love with a woman who didn't exist.
Let's start at the end, because the end is what puts the beginning into such horrifying context. After 6 years and over $800,000, what was the final devastating lie that brought this entire world you had built crashing down?
Her death. Her death was the final lie in a 6-year con that took everything from me. It was Christmas Day. I received an email, not from her, but from an associate. The message said she was gone, killed in a car accident. This was just days before I was scheduled to fly out to the Dominican Republic to finally be with her, to start the life I had spent 6 years and my entire fortune building.
Christmas Day? My God.
The grief was instant. It was absolute. I couldn't breathe. It felt like my entire world had just ceased to exist. In that moment, I believed the woman I loved, the mother of our child that we had lost, was dead. But the truth, which I would be forced to uncover in the weeks that followed, was infinitely worse. My world hadn't ended. It had never even been real. I wasn't grieving the loss of a life. I was grieving a ghost.
To understand how anyone gets to a point like that, Doug, we have to go back to the beginning. Take us back to 2004. What was your life like then? Who were you?
To understand how I could be so completely fooled, you have to understand my reality. My life has always been different. I have cerebral palsy, and I've used a wheelchair for most of my life. I've always been independent. I have a career as a computer systems analyst. I have friends. But finding a genuine, romantic connection has always been the great challenge of my life. I've always wanted what most people want: to fall in love, to get married, to build a family. But my physical reality always made that dream feel distant, almost like it was for other people, not for me.
And you mentioned that 2004 was a particularly difficult year.
It was. I had recently lost a loved one, and the grief from that loss created a void. The loneliness that followed wasn't just a passing feeling. It was like a heavy blanket, smothering everything. It was a quiet, profound desperation. In that state, I did what millions of people do every day. I went online. Not to a dating site, funnily enough. I felt that was a dead end for me. I went to an online escort agency.
What were you looking for there? Was it romance?
Not consciously. I wasn't looking for love in a place like that. I think I was just looking for a human connection, for a moment of relief from the overwhelming silence of my life. I just wanted to feel seen. And that's where I first saw her profile. Her name was Darkise, but she went by Nicole.
And you met her. What was that first meeting like?
It was immediately different from what I expected. It wasn't just a transaction. She was disarmingly attentive. She listened. She asked me about my life, my work as a systems analyst, my dreams. It was the way she looked at me. She seemed to see past the wheelchair, past the disability. She made me feel like she was seeing me. For someone who had felt largely invisible in a romantic sense for so long, that feeling was intoxicating. It was like a drink of water after a lifetime of thirst. It was everything I didn't even realize I was craving.
So it wasn't just a physical connection. She was building an emotional one from the very moment.
Exactly. Our relationship quickly evolved beyond the physical meetings. We started talking constantly. Long emails, phone calls that lasted for hours, instant messages. She was a master of what I now know is called love bombing. It's a textbook tactic. She just flooded my life with affection and attention. She told me she was falling for me, that she'd never met anyone like me. She convinced me with what felt like total sincerity that she loved me.
And did you believe her?
God, I wanted to believe it so badly. I needed to believe it. Looking back now with the clarity of hindsight, it was a perfect illusion. She was an escort. Her profession was literally to create fantasies for men. But my deepest fantasy wasn't physical. It was emotional. It was to be loved and accepted for who I was, wheelchair and all. She found that core vulnerability with surgical precision and exploited it.
And how did she use that against you? How did she start to build the future you would end up paying for?
She painted this beautiful picture. She told me that I was the reason she wanted to change her life. She said she hated the escort work and that our connection had shown her what real love could be. She described a future where we would be together, away from her past, in a life built on our love. It was the most seductive lie you can imagine, and I bought every last word. I fell completely and utterly in love with her. I truly believed we were building a future together.
So for about 2 years, this was, in your mind, a developing, legitimate, loving relationship. When did the shift happen? When did money enter the picture?
The shift was a masterpiece of manipulation. It happened in early 2006. After nearly 2 years of this intense emotional connection, Darkis made her move. She told me she was officially done with the escort business. She was getting out. She wanted to start that real life with me, the one we'd been talking about constantly. For me, that was the moment I'd been dreaming of. It felt like the ultimate validation, the proof that our love was real and that I had, in a way, saved her.
And right after that promise came the ask.
Right after. And it wasn't framed as an ask. She didn't say, "Can you give me money?" She presented it as a shared opportunity. She told me about these investment ventures in the Dominican Republic. Tourist villas, she said. It was our way out, a way for us to build a nest egg and start our life together with a solid financial foundation.
So you weren't a benefactor, you were a partner.
That's exactly how I saw it, and that's why it was so brilliant. I wasn't just giving her money, I was investing in us. I poured my savings into these non-existent tourist villas, believing I was laying the foundation for the home we'd one day share. The initial amounts were smaller, more plausible, but they grew fast. There was always another crisis, another bureaucratic hurdle, another customs fee or legal charge to pay to unlock our future.
So it becomes a cycle. You send money, the problem is temporarily solved, and then a new, more urgent one appears.
A relentless cycle. My inheritance from my parents, my retirement savings, it all just started draining away, one wire transfer at a time into this black hole of promises. Every time I'd send a large sum, the relief would be immense, but it would only last a week or two before the next emergency cropped up. And just as the amounts started getting so large that they were genuinely scaring me, just as I was starting to feel the first real pangs of doubt, she brought out the most powerful weapon in her arsenal.
What was that?
She told me she was pregnant.
Oh, Doug.
It hit me like a lightning bolt. A child. Our child. The idea of being a father, of having a family with the woman I loved, that was the fulfillment of my deepest, most cherished dream. It made everything real in an instant. The money, the stress of the investments, the logistical problems, all of it just faded into the background. A baby was on the way. Our baby.
So this became her leverage.
It became her ultimate bargaining chip. It was a stroke of cruel genius. From that moment on, anytime I hesitated, anytime the wire transfers got into the tens of thousands and I started to question things, she would bring up the baby. "It's for our child," she'd say. "This is to give our family a safe and secure start." How could I say no to that? How could I put a price on the safety of my unborn child and my future family? It cemented my commitment, silenced my growing doubts, and opened the floodgates of my finances completely. I would have done anything for that child. She knew it, and she milked it for every last drop.
This is incredibly painful. She gives you the ultimate dream, and then what?
Then, just as I had fully embraced the identity of being a father-to-be, she ripped it all away. A few months later, a frantic, tearful phone call. She told me she had a miscarriage. The grief was immense. It was a hollow, aching void. I'd lost a child I'd never even met. I was completely shattered.
And she used your grief as another opportunity.
My sorrow was her opening. She was devastated, she said, broken. And of course, there were unexpected medical bills from the complications. She needed more money to cover the hospital stay. I was grieving a fake loss and paying for it with very real money. It's monstrous to even think about now.
And at the same time, the investments are still demanding more money.
Yes, the crises were constant and overlapping. She needed money for cars, supposedly for our tourist business. Her driver and brother-in-law was a man named Nolan Johnson. I spoke to him often. He was her man on the ground, handling the logistics. He'd call me with urgent updates, convincingly explaining why another $20,000 needed for a vehicle, or why a legal fee had to be paid by morning.
And this Nolan Johnson, who was he really?
He was her husband. The man I was speaking to on the phone, the one who was pretending to be her driver and relative, was her actual husband, Nolan Johnson, my co-conspirator in the entire fraud.
Unbelievable.
The web was so tangled, the lies so layered, I couldn't see where one ended and the next began. I was so deeply invested, not just financially, but emotionally, that the red flags just looked like part of the scenery. I saw them as challenges we had to overcome together to earn our happiness. Looking back, they're painfully, blindingly obvious. But at the time, I was so blinded by love and by the promise of a life I had wanted for so long. She had me completely trapped in the beautiful, intricate cage she had built for me.
So by December of 2006, where did things stand?
By December, I had given her everything. My inheritance was gone. My life savings gone. My retirement funds drained. I'd taken out massive loans, maxed out my credit cards, and plunged myself into staggering debt. The total amount I had sent was over $800,000. But the plan was finally set. I had a plane ticket. I was just days away from flying to the Dominican Republic to finally be with her, to see the life we had supposedly built with my money.
You must have been clinging to that hope, that once you saw her, it would all be real.
It was the only thing keeping me going. I was terrified by the financial reality of what I had done, but I kept telling myself that once I was there, once I could hold her and see the villas and the business, it would all make sense. The sacrifice would have been worth it. That's when she played her final, most monstrous card.
Christmas Day.
Christmas morning. An email landed in my inbox. It wasn't from Darkis. It was from someone claiming to be an associate. The message was short and brutal. There had been a car accident. Darkis was dead.
The devastation must have been absolute.
It felt like the floor of the universe had just dropped out from under me. The woman I loved, the future I had poured my entire existence into, was gone forever. The grief was so profound, so overwhelming, it didn't even occur to me to question it. It was the tragic, horrible end to our story. Why would I doubt it? For all I knew, she was my everything, and now she was gone.
So what started to change? What pierced through that grief?
My friends. In my despair, I turned to my friends, and that's where her web finally, mercifully started to unravel. As I told them the entire story through my tears, the love, the investments, the pregnancy, the miscarriage, and now her sudden death right before I was supposed to arrive, they didn't just see a tragedy, they saw a pattern. They saw all the red flags I had been blind to for 6 years.
They had an outside perspective that you couldn't have.
Exactly. From their perspective, the story was just unbelievable. It was too much, too dramatic. They started asking questions, gently at first, then with more urgency. Doug, it's just too convenient that she would die right before you were supposed to show up and see where all the money went. They asked, had you ever actually visited her in the Dominican Republic? No. Had you ever seen a single piece of legal paperwork for these investments? No. Had you ever spoken to the doctors about the miscarriage or seen a bill? No.
That must have been terrifying to hear, to even consider.
Doubt was a tiny seed, but in the soil of their logic, it started to grow. It felt like a betrayal to her memory to even think it, but their questions echoed the faint whispers of my own intuition that I had suppressed for so long. With their support, I made the hardest decision of my life, to find out the truth one way or another. It was a terrifying proposition. Either my friends were wrong and I was desecrating the memory of the woman I loved, or they were right and my entire life for the past 6 years had been a complete and total lie.
So what started to change? What pierced through that grief?
My friends. In my despair, I turned to my friends, and that's where her web finally, mercifully started to unravel. As I told them the entire story through my tears, the love, the investments, the pregnancy, the miscarriage, and now her sudden death right before I was supposed to arrive, they didn't just see a tragedy. They saw a pattern. They saw all the red flags I had been blind to for 6 years.
They had an outside perspective that you couldn't have.
Exactly. From their perspective, the story was just unbelievable. It was too much, too dramatic. They started asking questions, gently at first, then with more urgency. Doug, it's just too convenient that she would die right before you were supposed to show up and see where all the money went. They asked, had you ever actually visited her in the Dominican Republic? No. Had you ever seen a single piece of legal paperwork for these investments? No. Had you ever spoken to the doctors about the miscarriage or seen a bill? No.
That must have been terrifying to hear, to even consider.
Doubt was a tiny seed, but in the soil of their logic, it started to grow. It felt like a betrayal to her memory to even think it, but their questions echoed the faint whispers of my own intuition that I had suppressed for so long. With their support, I made the hardest decision of my life, to find out the truth, one way or another. It was a terrifying proposition. Either my friends were wrong and I was desecrating the memory of the woman I loved, or they were right and my entire life for the past 6 years had been a complete and total lie.
So what started to change? What pierced through that grief?
We hired 2 private investigators, one in Canada, one in the Dominican Republic. It didn't take them long. The truth they uncovered was far more depraved than I could have possibly imagined. Darkise LaQueer Johnson was not dead. She was alive and well, living in Jamaica with her husband.
Her husband?
Her husband. That was the blow that finally shattered the entire illusion. She had been married the whole time, all 6 years. The man I had spoken to so often on the phone, the one who pretended to be her driver and loyal brother-in-law, Nolan Johnson, was her husband and partner in the con. There was no love, there were no villas, there was no pregnancy, there was no death. It was all a script, a long con meticulously designed and executed to drain me of every single penny I had.
And faking her own death?
Faking her own death was the final cowardly exit strategy. It was designed to cut all ties, to stop me from ever looking for my money, and to leave me grieving a ghost so that I would never look for a criminal. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking, and in that moment, receiving that PI report, I finally understood. I wasn't a bereaved lover. I was a victim.
When that reality hit you, what did the immediate aftermath look like?
It was a wasteland. Financially, I was completely wiped out. The $800,000 was gone, vanished into their pockets. But it didn't stop there. When you factor in the high-interest loans I had taken, the credit card debt, and then the legal fees to come, the hole I was in ballooned to over $1.4 million. I was at an age where I should have been looking forward to a comfortable retirement. Instead, I was facing a mountain of debt that I'll likely spend the rest of my life paying off.
And as catastrophic as that is, I imagine that pales in comparison to the emotional damage.
It's not even close. The financial loss was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. How do you grieve a person who never existed? How do you mourn a future that was just a story someone told you to rob you? The sense of betrayal was absolute. It felt like it rewired my brain. For 6 years I had shared my deepest hopes, my deepest fears, my most intimate thoughts with this person, and every single one of those conversations wasn't real. It was a tactic. I wasn't a partner. I was a target.
So you went to the police?
I went to the police, armed with the evidence from the private investigators. They took it seriously, and a case was built. The irony is that a few months after her supposed death, Darkise actually returned to Canada, probably thinking she had gotten away with it completely. She was arrested, and then began the long, grinding journey through the legal system.
What was that like for you?
It was 4 more years of hell. 4 years of having to relive every lie, every manipulation, for police reports, for lawyers, for the court. The trial was the hardest part. I had to stand in court, look at her, and read my victim impact statement, laying bare the full extent of the damage she had done to my life.
What was it like seeing her in that courtroom?
It was surreal. There was no flicker of remorse, no recognition of the human being whose life she had systematically dismantled, just a coldness. When I read my statement, I wasn't just talking about the money. I was trying to make her and the court understand the theft of my dreams, the theft of my chance to have a family, the theft of my trust in other people.
And what was the outcome?
In the end, she was convicted of multiple fraud-related charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Her husband, Nolan, got a conditional sentence. The court also ordered her to pay restitution, a total of $847,000.
Does that feel like justice?
It feels hollow. It's a piece of paper, a prison sentence that eventually ends. She's free now. It's an order to repay money that I know and the court knows I'll likely never see a dime of. She's out living her life, and I'm still here every single day paying the price.
You mentioned something the judge said to you that stuck with you.
Yes, in my victim impact statement, I talked about how stupid I felt, how I beat myself up constantly over the red flags I missed. After I finished reading, the judge looked directly at me and he said, "You need not be ashamed, sir, of having fallen in love. You are blameless in this." I'm still trying to believe that. I'm trying to let that sink in.
So, the $800,000 lesson. If you had to distill it down, what did you learn from this horrific experience?
I learned that your deepest, most noble desires can be weaponized against you. My longing for love, for connection, for a family, that wasn't a weakness, but it was the exact vulnerability she targeted and exploited. I learned that these scams aren't run by clumsy amateurs. They're sophisticated, long-term psychological operations. Scammers like Darkise are masters of human psychology. They don't just ask for money. They build an entire world around you. They sell you a dream so completely that you will pay any price just to keep that dream alive, because the alternative, the truth, is too devastating to face.
Doug, the reason you're sharing this is so that others don't have to learn this lesson the way you did. Looking back with the clarity you have now, what were the specific red flags that you wish you had paid attention to?
They flash like neon signs now. The first, and this is classic, is that the relationship moved incredibly fast and was intensely emotional right from the start. That love bombing I mentioned is a powerful tool. It's designed to overwhelm your rational thinking and forge a powerful bond of dependency. It makes you feel like you found your 1 in a billion soulmate. My advice is, if it feels too good to be true, it almost always is. Real love builds over time. Manufactured love is instantaneous.
The second red flag you mentioned was a sense of isolation.
Yes, she never let me into her real world. There was always a plausible, well-crafted reason I couldn't visit her unexpectedly, a reason I could never meet her real family or friends, only the characters in her script, like Nolan. A healthy, real relationship moves toward integrating your lives. A scam is built on keeping you completely isolated in a fantasy bubble that they control. If the person you're involved with online constantly makes excuses to keep your world separate, that is a huge, huge warning sign.
And the constant state of emergency.
An endless series of crises. There was always a fire that only my money could put out, a business deal on the verge of collapse, a surprise tax, a sudden medical bill, a legal problem. These scams work by creating a constant state of panic and urgency. They don't give you time to breathe, to think clearly, or to talk to anyone else. They keep you off balance, reacting emotionally to one manufactured disaster after another.
And the biggest red flag of all.
The one that should be an absolute, uncrossable line, a request for money. Let me be perfectly clear to anyone listening. You should never, ever send money to someone you have only met online. I don't care how compelling their story is, how deep your connection feels, or how much you think you love them. The moment money gets involved, you are no longer in a romance. You are in a transaction, and you are the target. Period.
So, what are the practical steps people can take to protect themselves?
Be skeptical. It's okay to be hopeful, but lead with caution. And most importantly, talk to your friends and family about your online relationships. Don't keep it a secret. If you feel like you have to hide the relationship or the things they're telling you, that is your own gut telling you something is wrong. That's a form of shame, and shame is a tool the scammer uses to isolate you. I had that little voice in my head. I had moments when things just didn't add up. I chose to ignore it because the dream she was selling was too beautiful. Don't make my mistake. Listen to that voice and verify. Do a reverse image search on their photos. Look for their digital footprint. If they claim to be a successful professional but have zero online presence, be suspicious. And again, for the love of God, never, ever send money.
Doug, this experience has obviously changed the entire trajectory of your life. How do you even begin to rebuild after something like this?
It's a slow process. The financial damage is one thing, a life sentence of debt, but the emotional scars run much deeper. It took years to rebuild my sense of self, to learn to trust anyone again, and that includes my own judgment. For a long time, I hated myself for being so naive. But I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but for awareness. These predators are out there. They're patient, they're sophisticated, and their methods are always evolving.
And that's why you're asking people who are listening to this to share it.
Yes, if this story resonated with you, I'm asking you to do one simple thing. Share it. Share it with your parents, your friends, your siblings, anyone in your life who might be lonely and vulnerable. Awareness is the only real shield we have against this kind of predatory deception. Knowledge is power.
And for anyone who might be listening who is in a similar situation or has been, what is your message to them?
You are not alone, and you are not to blame. The shame and embarrassment these scammers make you feel is a deliberate part of the trap that keeps you silent and keeps them safe. We have to break that silence. By talking about these experiences, we take away the power of shame, and we arm others with the knowledge to protect themselves. You are not stupid. You were targeted by a professional.
Doug, thank you. What is the final thought you want to leave us with? The ultimate lesson from this?
It took me 6 years and a fortune to learn that the most expensive lies are not the ones others tell us. They're the ones we tell ourselves because we so desperately want them to be true. Please learn from my loss. Don't pay that price.